Dodge this.
One world currency.
The New World Order.
Those are the roots of trouble.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live edition of DTRH. It is December 30th. Wow, it is actually the last live edition of DTRH for 2014. I actually just realized that. I had actually not even had that thought cross my mind actually until I was reading the date out loud right now. So, yes, it is the last live edition of DTRH for 2014. The next time I speak to you, it'll be January 1st, 2015. How are we going to start the new year? I don't know. We'll see on Thursday. We shall see. Wow. Whole year gone by already. 2014 was a bit of a rough year, was it not? For many people. I know it was for me. I thought it was shaping up to actually be a good year finally, and then the bottom dropped out of my entire universe. But anyway, enough about me. I have an entire jam-packed broadcast for you all tonight. Again, for the newer listeners that are just recently tuning in, all of my older broadcasts, you can always go to truthfrequencyradio.com, get a subscription, and any of my Truth Frequency archives are there. But if you want any of my older stuff, you can go to my website, federaljack.com. That's what you hear my buddy Timmy, when we did my intro, you'll hear him say in the beginning, and now, here's your host from federaljack.com, it's Popeye. Right, well, federaljack.com, for those of you that don't realize, is my website. If you go there, I used to keep it more updated with news and stuff. I've slowly been trying to take myself out of the news cycle, and I do still post stuff and stories and stuff, but it's more so of an archive site and a researcher's dream box, if you will. There's tons of download stuff. I've created a huge download section. I've put a lot of energy and focus on that. I do everything myself, so it takes time. Anyway, go over to federaljack.com. The Down the Rabbit Hole archive section there contains every show, podcast, special broadcast I've ever done. So Down the Rabbit Hole, guests, like if I was a guest spot on someone's show or filling in for another radio show host, which I've done on not only any networks that I've been on, but I've also been invited to be guest host on other people's shows on other networks. So if I'm on or I'm interviewed, I always render an archive and I throw the audio in there. Now, there's also a section, there's different ways to listen to my shows over there. The other way is you can actually listen on the website itself. And each show is a post on Federal Jack. And then there's links that you can listen to it on YouTube or go to the download section and just download it. But I try to give you guys as many options as possible to hear the broadcast. And of course, it's all for free. Federal Jack is completely free. Go check it out. That's why it's there. It's a labor of love. And like I said, it's a researcher's wet dream. Anyway, let's get to tonight's broadcast. Every time around this year, every year around this time is what I meant to say. My brain is doing 100 miles an hour. Sorry. Every year around this time, I have a good friend of mine on. I've been doing this for the past couple of years. Good buddy of mine, very close friend of mine. She's a fellow broadcaster, an activist, and an all-around awesome human being because she does so many things that you people have no clue to help others. And she doesn't get a pat in the back for it. She does this stuff every year. She's one of the members of the Freedom Link team and one of my very close friends. I'm going to welcome back my good friend, Gwen Caldwell. Gwen, welcome back.
Hey, Popeye. Thanks for having me on. Good to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure always to hang out with you. You know I absolutely adore you. But we do this every year. It's like a special thing around this time, around the anniversary of Wounded Knee. Within like a week or so of the actual date, sometimes even on the date itself, depending on when I'm broadcasting, you and I have always done this special thing where once a year we talk about Native American issues. We go over what it's like to actually live on a reservation, what the Native people are actually going through on the reservation. And, you know, like Russell Means said, the rest of the United States is now the reservation with the police state. And we can get into that, you know, later on. But I want to focus specifically more so on Native issues, and I want to talk a little bit about Wounded Knee with you tonight, which we've done every year. And some people might say, oh, Popeye, I went to history class, and I know what happened. You know, we all know the stories. Well, no, you really don't. You don't know.
No, you really don't.
You don't know it from Gwen's perspective because she lives it. See, many of you people don't realize, but Gwen is Native. She's Native American, okay? She's one of the Lakota. So I hate to break the news to you, but your history books will not give you the course that you're going to get from her tonight. So without wasting any more time, Gwen, first of all, before we get into it, thank you so much, because I know this is an issue that sometimes it's very emotional for you. And I know you, because of all the work you do and everything you've seen on the reservations over the years, you know, it does take a lot out of you. So first and foremost, let me thank you as a fellow member of the human race for what you do for your other fellow humans, because it's absolutely amazing. Like, I know what you do off air, honey. Amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, I think, you know, when today, it was 23 below Fahrenheit here, and yesterday the riders came into Wounded Knee on the memorial ride, which is a ride that they do every year, and it's mostly young people, and they take the trip that Bigfoot took to Wounded Knee, where he and his the band that were traveling with him were massacred, and there were 300 women, children, and mostly elderly that were slaughtered there. They were unarmed. It was quite cold, and they just shot them and left them laying in the snow. And photographs that a lot of people have seen of the massacre show Chief Bigfoot frozen in the snow. And, you know, he's an ancestor of my son's, and we were at a Wounded Knee, I don't know, it's kind of like a Wounded Knee Memorial Museum or something. And there were a lot of people in there, and most of them non-Indian. And my son was looking around in that museum, and they had this big picture of Chief Bigfoot frozen in the snow. And he got to that picture, and he just started hollering out, "Mom, how come they have my dead grandpa on the wall in here?" You know, and everybody starts walking around where this kid is to see who his dead grandpa is, you know. but it's you see those pictures over and over and over again, and it's just like the mainstream media. In a way, I think it starts desensitizing people to the level of atrocity that has been committed against a whole group of people that were completely innocent. Chief Bigfoot was pulled in a wagon because he was dying of pneumonia, and they were on their way to Pine Ridge, a day's ride from Pine Ridge, when they were all massacred. But like I said, they were women, children, and old people, sick people, and they were going to Pine Ridge for protection and to get help. And it wasn't, a band of scouts or a band of young men, warriors, it was the most vulnerable of the culture. And I see the parallels now, and it's, I think Russell, I think it was right when he said, welcome to the reservation, because all of America is the reservation now. And I hear all the time, you need to assimilate. You need to assimilate, quit complaining and all of that kind of stuff. Well, when you're not given any tools or any opportunity to assimilate, and everything that you do to assimilate to better yourself or your family or what you're doing, you come up against obstacles, which we'll talk about later in the show. But, it's not as simple as assimilating. We are talking about an agenda that is over 500 years old, a genocide agenda that's well over 200 years old and been very effective. And that agenda, it has a new name, a new face, new players, but the consequence of it and the day-to-day impact of it hasn't changed one damn bit. And so when we look at what the common denominators are, we look at the what I see that is current, that brings everybody to that reservation level, is basically we're prisoners of war. The reservations are prison of war camps. They were put there by the Department of War, who later became the Department of Interior. In some cases, on some reservations, the Department of Natural Resources. Now, it says right on your tribal identification card, that you're managed by the Department of Wildlife, just like you're a wolf or a bear or a deer or something, and it's very minimizing. But what I mostly see the similarities in this current administration, the socialized health care. The United States Department of Navy contracts to provide Indian health services, and they don't provide health care. They provide sick care and emergency care. We don't have anything called health care in this country anymore. We have sick care. And so the socialized medicine is one example of a common denominator. Trying to desensitize people through the history and the stories, his stories that are told, to demonize or minimize what actually happened, so that people can better stomach the reality. We're sold our enemy. And so I see I see the similarities, but when you live in an environment where there's 82 to 95% unemployment rate, when you live somewhere where the teen suicide rate is 300% higher than their stateside counterparts, when
Well,
you
I want to pause that right there. I want people to think about that for a second. So the unemployment rate on the reservation is somewhere in like the 90% range. And then the suicide rate for teenagers, if people think that, oh my God, it's for the children. Well, the suicide rate on the reservation is over 300 times higher than that in the general populace. Is that what you're saying?
that's the teen suicide rate. The teen suicide rate.
What about the
When
adult suicide rate? Is there?
uh, I don't know, but I can tell you that the life expectancy of a Native man is 47 years old and a Native woman 52 or 53. That's the life
Wow.
expectancy on the reservation.
Wow. So if you live on the reservation your whole life and never get off, your life expectancy is only in the late 40s for a male?
Yes.
Wow. I didn't even know that. I mean, I knew a lot of the shocking statistics and things, but I didn't know that.
Yeah. And, I think, when you look at the rate of alcoholism and drug addiction, most of that it's fueled generationally by shame and guilt that I think is a direct product of the boarding schools and the boarding schools. They took children at a very young age, cut their hair, forbid them to speak their language. They had no contact with their family, their extended family, their tribe, their traditions, nothing. And then at some point, they're returned, expected to be white or behave white in a Native community, afraid to be Native because they got beat for being Native. And so they come back with all this shame and guilt. They don't have any parenting skills role modeled for them. They don't see the function of the extended family. They don't have any sense of community outside of their institutional mentality at that juncture. They don't know how normal relationships or conflict resolution within relationships might happen because they never witnessed any of that in their entire time of growing up in their childhood. It wasn't a part of what they learned. What they learned is you speak Indian, you get beat. What they learned is we don't care if you're Native, we're cutting your hair. You learn if you do anything we don't like, we're going to beat you, we're going to put you in a closet, we're going to somehow otherwise torture you. And in many cases, in the residential schools, it was murder.
And
Not only that,
and the cutting of the hair thing, by the way, is like for people that don't understand, it would be like for my brothers and sisters that served in the military and served in the Iraq invasion. Okay, if like you took a Muslim man and an Arab man and you shaved an Arab man's face, his beard off, that would be considered humiliating to him because the beard is a mark of his being a man. There's just I could get sidetracked with it. The point is there's a lot of belief. There's a lot to it. Well, it's the same thing with the Native American men. Their hair is part of their spirituality. The long hair, people. Why do Indians have that long hair? Well, they have long hair, and they're not Indians. I like to call them Native Americans or natives. I hate the word Indian because they didn't come from India. Okay, and Gwen knows I hate that word. But the cutting of the hair is it's like a demoralization tactic to them because it's a very spiritual thing. Their long hair, and it goes to them connecting to their spiritual roots, and Gwen could explain it much better. But it's for basic layman terms, it's basically like it would be like stripping them naked and beating them, or stripping them naked and leaving them in a room full of 150 or 200 people. It's the same type of dehumanization and humiliating thing, except for them, their belief in their long hair, that adds to it. It would be just like if you were a Christian and you had a cross tied around your neck and they ripped it off and smashed it into pieces in front of your face. It would be pretty much the same thing of how it would be done to make you feel and demoralize you and bring you down. That's what was done. So when Gwen says they cut their hair, I don't want people to be like, oh, well, who cares? So they cut their freaking hair. Trust me, they cared, Before we just go off and I get irritated about this because I see so many people that don't have even the basic understanding of what happened. It wasn't cowboys and Indians and stuff that they tried to teach us in the history books, okay? And what was done to the natives was horrible. And yes, there were native tribes that were war tribes, and they fought and they killed and they did bad things, okay, here and there. But really, who did what first? I mean, we came here, right? The Pilgrims came here. They were almost dead. The natives helped them survive, and in repayment of that, and helping, look, you can make teepees, you can make shelter. Here's how you plant corn, and here's how you do this. Here's how you hunt. This is where the food is. Okay, thank you. Here's some smallpox laden blankets for you. I mean, that's
Right.
that's what we did in return. Like, thanks for helping us.
And that was after mass murder. And it really chaps me when I hear people that have the audacity to tell me that this country was built on good Christian values. Are you freaking kidding me? If that is an example of what Christianity is and what God commands Christians to do, they are sadly misguided. And they never would have survived a year here without the assistance of the tribes that helped them, because they were freezing and they were starving. But we celebrate Columbus Day as if Columbus was some kind of hero. Oh, he discovered America. You know what? Are you kidding me? How do you discover something that a whole continent full of people already live on? How does that work out? It's just mind-boggling to me. But it's the lies are told generationally by the people who win the wars, who commit the massacres. It's all told through their stories. It has nothing to do with the truth. It has nothing to do with reality. And going back to the boarding schools, now we have the Department of Social Services now, who has stepped into the role of the boarding school, and now they're the perpetrators of the familial genocide. And there are 9 reservations in South Dakota. 10% of the population is Native, and yet 60 to 80% of the children that they remove from their homes are Native children. And they go through the process of the removal. Generally, it's not because of some form of abuse that's happened. It's because the parents went to get assistance. Either they had a utility shut-off notice, they need food, they have an eviction notice, something else brings them to the attention of the Department of Social Services. Well, at that point, they'll go in and they'll remove the children, and they're using poverty as a definition for neglect. And so they remove the children, and then they adopt them out, and they get federal incentives to adopt the children out, and it's always in violation of the Indian Child Welfare Act, where the children, first and foremost, are supposed to go with a family member. Secondly, they would go with a tribal member. And if there is no tribal member available to take them, then they would go to another tribe before they're even supposed to be considered for adoption to a non-native family. Well, that simply is not happening in this country today. These children are being adopted out to non-Indian families, and they terminate the parental rights. These parents have never had a criminal charge of child abuse. It's all done through an administrative process. They can't call witnesses. They can't subpoena any documents or witnesses on their behalf. And they've never been, even though there are statutes on the books that define what child abuse is, what is neglect, what is abuse. These parents are never charged with any of those crimes, and yet their children are taken away from them and adopted out. And when we come back after the break, Papa, I want to talk about what that does psychologically, not only to the families, but to the entire community when that happens, because I had an experience with that was literally shocking.
And you know what? It's good for people to hear this stuff because, again, what you see the natives going through on the reservations is a microcosm of what's actually going on throughout this whole country.
That's right.
It's so like when you see CPS doing what you see CPS doing to the natives, they have the same idea. They export that same mentality and they do it to the general public. This, people need to. This isn't just native things. I mean, tonight we're focusing on that, but again, everything's connected.
They are harvesting our children as a cash crop. Be certain of it.
You got that right. I couldn't have said it better. Hold your thought right there, Gwen. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. 3 short minutes. We will be right back. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. So when we went to break, Gwen and I were discussing, tonight, the theme of the broadcast is the Native American genocide, history of and it's not full detail. I mean, I'd have to spend 8 hours doing a full detailed history of it, but kind of like a 2-hour, I don't want to say like gloss over because that sounds like we're just trying to make it look.
It's a short expose.
Yes, there you go. A short a brief historical trip down. I don't want to say memory lane, but because it makes it sound nice. But I guess for lack of a better term, down this country's memory lane, but the true memory lane, not the fantastic garbage version that we've been fed. And for you to understand this stuff is important because what they do on the reservations, they're doing to this whole country. The reservations are a microcosm of what is going on. So if you see CPS doing things there and they haven't done it in the country yet, they're going to. I mean, CPS already steals people's children. This isn't even a debate anymore. Anybody that actually defends CPS's actions has never actually paid attention or done a tenth of the research that they should be into what actually happens to the children that CPS takes. I mean, they get lost, they get sold, they get molested. Yeah, I know. Murdered. It sounds fantastic, and crazy, but you should actually go look it up and you'll see that it's not some fantastic story that someone came up with that they just, wow, that guy's crazy. What kind of drugs did he take? No, this is all real, unfortunately. CPS does not have your children's best interest at heart. And if you see what they're doing to the native people of this country, then you'll have a better understanding of what they have planned for you and what is actually going on right now as I have this conversation with Gwen and the rest of you. So, Gwen, you said that you had an example that you wanted to get into, and I know this is kind of a personal story, and it might be a little hard or emotional to talk about, so I want to thank you for being willing to talk about this. But what did what was your story? Tell everybody, I'll shut up. What was your experience, and get as much detail as you need to.
They don't just terminate the parental rights when they adopt these kids out. They terminate sibling rights, and they do exactly what Hitler did. They separate the children because it's easier to brainwash and manipulate children who have no familial bond or memory. So they separate the children. And and then they tell them, well, you're going to go to a family that really loves you. You're going to go to a family that aren't drunks, or, this kind of thing. And so what we've found in our research, I went around to the reservations. I did speaking engagements. I did intake forms. And this was after a very extensive conversation that I had with Russell Means, because I was really, I was kind of freaking out. I was really concerned when I started following the money and I started seeing the numbers. I was just like, I was ready to blow a gasket. And so what really struck me initially was there were, under the Adoption and Safe Families Act of 1997, there were 17 or 20 criteria that had to be met in order for the state to get that federal funding, to commit genocide against the Native kids. Well, only 3 of those criteria were at that time being met by the state of South Dakota. And so I talked to Russell about that. I talked to him about wanting to do meetings, get people informed, about what was going on, what the law actually says, how they can actually, stand up for themselves if they're approached by social services and this kind of thing. So Russell gave me his radio show. And so I went out to the radio station. I did a radio show every week, and I started doing meetings on the reservation. And we did intake forms, and because I wanted to, somehow in my mind's eye, there was some racist judge and there was some racist social worker, and I was going to nail them, and boy, there were common denominators, but not judges, not social workers. The common denominators were that not all the children, I think there was only one case where all of the children were removed from the home. Not all of the children had their parental rights terminated, just part of them. Generally, it was the younger children who are easier to adopt out. There were 2 cases where the people had come to the attention of social services outside of the fact that they had gone for services to get help. People think social services is there to help you. And I can't recommend anybody going to social services for any damn thing that I can think of, because if you have children, you're going to risk losing them. The other thing was that the social workers would go to court and they would tell the judge that the Indian Child Welfare Act didn't apply because the child wasn't eligible for enrollment in a federally recognized tribe. So there were all these common denominators, but none of them was indicating any one judge or any one social worker in particular. And so in the county where I now live, 49% of the children that are removed from their homes come out of this one county, and 60 to 80% of those children are Native. Now, their parents are 3rd to 5th generation products of Carlisle boarding schools or other boarding schools, and they don't know, they never had role modeled for them how to parent, how to manage yourself in a relationship with a partner. What is the role of the extended family? What do mothers do to support that extended family unit? All of that was taken away. And it was taken away through generational boarding school. So anyway, now the Department of Social Services has picked up that ball, and it's not the boarding schools anymore in that role. Now it's the Department of Social Services. As a family rights advocate, most of the people that I dealt with were grandparents trying to get visitation or get custody of grandchildren that had been removed. There was a woman on Pine Ridge Reservation. She had 2 children of her own. She was married. They were drug and alcohol free. They both had jobs. They had a nice home. And her sister was drinking and doing drugs and lost her children. And they were going to adopt those children out. And so she tried to get the children. So then you have to do a home study, which you pay for, which is, like $1,500. Then you have to do a background check, and you have to do all of these things so that they can make sure that you're qualified to be this person. So they did all of that. They passed everything. You have to go through parenting classes. You have to have a psychological evaluation. You have to have a drug and alcohol evaluation. And this is these kids' auntie, for God's sakes. They're relative, not some stranger.
What is a house check? What is that? I mean, I know what a background check is, but what's a house check?
Oh yeah, they come in and they check to make sure you've got enough beds. They even make people buy bigger cars to accommodate the children. They do all this shit, and then they tell the people that they can't have them. Now, in this case, the mother got the thumbs up, but her husband owed back child support of $2,000, and they just didn't think he would be qualified to raise additional children because he owed back child support. So those kids got adopted out to a non-Indian family. When there were willing people within their family to take those children that they had a relationship with. This makes me so angry. I can't even begin to tell you. If you're a felon, well, hell, I did a meeting in Rapid City years ago. I asked a whole room full of people. I said, how many of you Native men are not felons? One man stood up and he said, I am not a felon. And I said, is he the only one in this room, the only male Lakota man that in this room that is not a felon? The only one. So anytime you commit a crime on the reservation, then it becomes a federal case. So whatever you've done becomes a felony. And so if you're a felon, then, you've got strikes against you, so you don't qualify to have these children. It could have been any number of things. It could have been when you were 18 and you're now 40. It doesn't matter. None of that is taken into consideration.
So if the woman has the kid, then they come take the children from them if they're found not to be qualified?
No, but they will not let family members adopt those children whose parental rights have been terminated. They won't let them go with the families.
Wow, it just amazes me that they terminate parental right like it's a driver's license.
Exactly. And this has been my complaint all along. If there has been no criminal conviction of child abuse, you have no authority or right to terminate their parental rights.
And that's just like CPS doing the same thing to the parents when they come and, and you see it all the time, ladies and gentlemen. It's not just, that's just inner city kids. Wrong answer. How many white people out in the middle of Kansas or out in the middle of East Bumble F, USA, out in the Midwest, wherever, are having CPS come to their door and knock on the door and take their kids away because the kid goes to the hospital with a fever and the parents take him to the emergency room and suddenly they're abusing the child or some other BS excuse.
Well, what they're doing now is they're targeting, they target groups, they target patriot groups, they target homeschoolers, they target Christians, they target natives, they target Latinos, blacks, so they just go from one group of people to the next. And when they start fighting back, then they move along, So anyway, one day, this lady called me, and she said, my mom is very old, and she wanted me to call you. She wants you to do something for her before she dies. And I'm like, okay. First of all, who is your mom? How does she know about me? And what is it that she wants me to do? Well, she heard you on Keeley Radio, and she said, before I was born, I had a sister. And the Mormons came with a worker from the hospital, and they took my baby sister from my mother. And she couldn't understand what they were saying because she only spoke Lakota. And so the lady from the hospital was kind of halfway translating, but they made her sign a paper, and they said that they were going to take her baby to the hospital, and the baby never came back. And she said, my mom had 15 kids. She said, my mom had 15 kids, and she has never stopped grieving the loss of that baby, and she wants to find that baby before she dies. You talk about heart-wrenching. My God. You know, when your child dies, when your wife dies, your husband dies, your parents, your grandparents, there's a grieving process you go through and your life goes on. But when they take your children and they terminate parental rights, no, I can't imagine the post-traumatic stress that this causes the children, but the parents, every time they drive by a group of kids that are in the age group of their children whose rights have been terminated because they were poor, they're looking to see if they might recognize that child as being their own. They're always wondering, is that child okay? You know, you never get to grieve. It never ends. You never get to go through a mourning process because somewhere, you know, out there, your child is somewhere that's been raped and taken from you illegally in violation of federal law to perpetuate an agenda of genocide by the corporation of the United States. And if there is anybody out there that thinks that's okay, I'm telling you, it's despicable. Absolutely despicable.
Yeah, it's the it's for the children excuse, Gwen.
Bullshit.
I know. I completely 1,000% concur. I mean, look at even if you don't look at the Indian boarding schools. Oh, I said the word. The native boarding schools. Okay, don't even look at them for a second. Look at look at the same model of school, the same model of control that's used outside of the reservation now. Look what they found down here in Florida. All these schools, this one school there where they were sending these kids to get quote-unquote reformed, and now they're digging up bodies in the back like it's going out of style.
That was commonplace, Popeye. Commonplace, the murder of Native children. They were raped. They were murdered. They were abused, beaten. It's horrific. The stories of the survivors of these boarding schools. Horrible. The thing about it is that it's so far away from the quiet, loving, supportive family and extended family environment that they came from. I mean, there were no locks on the doors. There were no criminals. There were no beatings. There weren't rapes. If you did something like that back in those days, you would have been banished. You know, you wouldn't even, your name would never have been able to be spoken again. You would just be gone. That's it. People didn't do that to one another. Now, there's, the incest and child rape is off the charts, generally committed by people who are in altered states from drug and alcohol, victims of abuse themselves. it's become, I can't even, it just makes me crazy. Oh my God.
Yeah, but if you look at what they've done to the native families, that's what they're doing to the American family structure as a whole.
Well, it's absolutely what they're doing. That is exactly what they're doing. So I want to move on a little bit to talk about the statistics I'm most familiar with, and I want to go back to the teen suicide thing because in 2008, in the fall of 2008, in the community where I lived on Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota, there were 6 teen suicides within 2 weeks. The youngest child that committed suicide was 11 years old. When I think about a child at 11,
what drove an 11-year-old to kill himself?
well, that's my point. At 11 years old, you already don't have any hope. At 11 years old, you've got no dream that you want to live for. You don't believe one person loves you enough to live for them. You don't love one person enough to live for them. 11 freaking years old. Are you freaking kidding me? That, I'm telling you, at that point, that was like my tipping point. That was more than I could take. One of the first suicide in that 2-week period was a relative. It was a nephew, and he hung himself. And when the school bus pulled up to pick him up for school, all the kids on the bus saw him hanging in a tree where he would normally get on the bus.
That's horrible. That's absolutely horrible.
Now, this is the thing for me. Every single person in that community is guilty of murder, in my opinion. Because had anybody, any one person in that community been doing the right thing, paying attention, extending themselves in a good way instead of being self-absorbed and selfish or drunk or on drugs or scamming and scheming or whatever they're doing, instead of taking care of the children who are sacred and come to us in a sacred way and who are our future and who we as generation keepers are responsible for not only this generation and the next generation, but for 7 generations, we have failed them, each and every one. And we're just as responsible as anybody else, even though we aren't directly connected to that family or that community or anything else. Because what hope are we giving them? What have we done to give them any hope? What have we done to give them any love? What have we done to give them a dream? And how you treat the most vulnerable in your society and in your culture is how you are measured as a people. And our youth, they're dropping like flies to suicide.
That's an insane rate. I mean, how many children a day? Like, well, I'm sure each day it varies, but I mean, on the average, is there like one suicide a day on the reservation? And when I say the reservation, I mean the one you live on. There's more than one, ladies and gentlemen. Just so we're all clear.
There are 9 reservations in South Dakota, and I really don't know about all of the suicides. I don't know that. I just know that in general, the rate of suicide is 300% higher than the stateside. And I see,
That's disgusting. Even if it was 1% higher, it's still just disgusting in general. But I mean, 300, that's insane. I mean,
300%.
all you got to do is go get the statistics for 2013, because they probably won't have them out for 2014 until 2 to 3 days from now, because the end of the year is until 2 or 3 days from now. But let's take the 2013 statistics for suicides, and then multiply that by threefold, and that's, you know what I mean, for teen suicides, and then multiply that threefold. I mean, that's...
But what we're seeing now is that same epidemic creeping into the non-native community.
Oh, yeah. Well, you see it with kids all the time. You see teenagers getting all banged up and jammed up for whatever reason. They're depressed. Like you said, they don't have any hope. They get whatever. They don't, maybe they have a bad home life, whatever. Whatever excuse, there's a bazillion different reasons, and kids are taught that their lives are disposable now.
Well, I want to tell you something. We don't parent our children anymore. We're not parenting them. We give them Xbox, and we give them computers, and we give them all this stuff to entertain them. We stick them in front of a TV, and we don't parent them. We send them off to school to be programmed.
You send them off to get programmed, and you stick them in front of the television, and they watch.
They don't have
whatever the hell.
They don't have parents.
Now, so.
We have disposable fathers and disposable mothers. We'll just, if things don't work out, we'll just get a divorce. And
it's a disposable society, Gwen.
It is. It's throwaway.
That's why
we have
everything,
yes.
everything from marriage to physical objects to the way you do things, everything is a disposable, toss away society. So people don't have any real connection to anything. They're not grounded. That's why these kids aren't grounded. And you hit the nail on the head. People they don't parent anymore. And to a large extent they can't, because again, it goes back, dovetails back into CPS, right? CPS will come in and threaten the parents. Oh, if you discipline your kids, we'll take them from you. So now the parent is afraid of what will happen to the child if the kid gets taken from them. So now they're afraid to, discipline the kid. And in a lot of cases, that empowers the child, because then at the same time, they're telling the child, you can do what you want. You don't need your parents. And they're creating this huge rift. They're doing it on purpose to destroy the family structure. And that's why these kids feel hopeless today, because they're not being parented. They're upset for a myriad of reasons, and they're taught that their lives are disposable. I mean, they have a pop song out by this girl, Kesha, who actually even said that she was forced to sing the lyrics, even though she didn't believe in them. The song, it's called Die Young. All these songs they teach these kids about dying early. They pump it into their heads. It's in TV, it's in movies and media constantly, that they're disposable and that they're garbage and that they should die very early. I'm going to pause this right there, Gwen, because the break is sneaking up. I can hear the music behind us. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We get back in hour number 2 in 3 short minutes. Gwen and I will pick up right where we're leaving off. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on tonight's live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Popeye from FederalJack.com. It is December 30th, 2014, the last live edition of DTRH for 2014, and I know I myself am just glad to get this year over with, although it is very bittersweet, because I will be starting a new year without my beautiful wife. So, yeah, if I could just fast forward to March, that would be great. So, anyway, hour number 2. Hang out tonight with my good friend, one of the hosts of the Freedom Link radio broadcast here on Truth Frequency Radio, which happens to be on Mondays and Wednesdays in this very same time slot. Joe and I share the same time slot now, so the Freedom Link is on the same time that Down the Rabbit Hole is, but on Mondays and Wednesdays, and then of course there's always Freaky Friday, and my good buddy Kev Baker, KBS, on right before us. Awesome broadcast. Anyway, my good friend Gwen Caldwell from the Freedom Link radio broadcast. Back for hour number 2, Gwen, and we were talking about some serious stuff. I know, as I said that we're discussing the Native American genocide, but when I say that, it's not just what happened in the past, which Gwen and I we're going to touch on Wounded Knee. We'll get into it a little bit more. I know Gwen has been there herself, and we can touch on that. We'll get into that the second segment of the second hour here, and to some of the historical aspect of it. But the genocide continues, and I bring this up because now it's being exported throughout the rest of the country to the general populace. So, again, it's a microcosm of what's actually going on or what's coming down the pike for the rest of the populace. So people need to pay attention. Now, when we went to break, we were talking about what they do to the kids of society as a whole nowadays, because you brought up the surprising, alarming statistic that on Indian reservations throughout, and I hate saying that word, Native reservations. See, once in a while it still slips into my lexicon.
We just call them prison of war camps.
Okay, the POW camps, the Native POW camps. I like that better.
That's right.
Native FEMA camps. I like that better. So in the Native FEMA camps,
Are you beginning to see the similarities here, folks?
oh, it's disgusting. I don't know how people can't. So in these Native FEMA camps throughout the country, there's this alarming statistic that even though you have the average suicide rate for the country as a whole, on the reservations, the suicide rate for that same age group is 300% higher. I mean, that's insane. But now this high level of suicide is starting to leak its way out into mainstream. It's almost coming full circle back into, regular society again. And you're seeing this uptick in teen suicide. And again, it's because you have to question, why do they feel hopeless? What's going on?
Well, can I address that before you go on, Popeye?
Go ahead. The floor is yours.
One of the things when I was doing the research and following the money and looking at the numbers, there were some numbers that went up simultaneously. So in 1997, when Hillary Clinton wrote and crammed the Adoption and Safe Families Act down Congress's throat and lobbied to have that passed, there was at that time there was a debate about how federally funding child abuse in the state was going to cause a problem, which has been the case. And so at the same time that the state started getting the funding to adopt children out, in South Dakota, where there are 9 reservations, the state legislature, at the behest of the Department of Social Services, passed a bill that the Department of Interior could be billed for foster care reimbursement. So for every Native child, and every single Native child, they deem special needs. So as a special needs foster child, they're worth more money. Depending on their age, they are worth $3,000 to $6,000 a month from the federal government. Then again, from the Department of Interior. Then they go after both the parents for child support. So it's a money-making deal. And then if they go over their baseline in adoptions, they get extra incentives from the federal government. And once they adopt those children out, they get $6,000 per child that they adopt out. So it's a very lucrative industry, the child abuse industry. And so at the same time that those numbers started going up, once the state had access to these financial incentives, and no legislator, let me be clear about this. I have lobbied, I have screamed and hollered, met privately, got legislative hearings, have testified more times than I can count at committee meetings, Indian child welfare hearings, you name it. I'm not I mean, I was in this up to my eyebrows. Um, and the legislators, every one of them are going to say, don't you care about the children? These children are being abused. And they really freaking believe that Native people don't know how to parent their children, except that in the year 2000, all of a sudden, every Native in the state became a crackhead, an abusive parent, a neglectful parent, or something, as soon as the state, not the parents, but the state got help to subsidize their child abuse industry to the tune of millions of dollars a year. So at the same time that those removals started going up, the drug and alcohol abuse went up. The teen suicide rate went up. I mean, as many children, when you look at a scale, the number of children removed from 2000 to 2013, let's say, as that scale goes up, you can look at a suicide scale and it is identical. Identical. This has, this removal of children and what it does to the parents and to the grandparents and the family and the community is so unbearable and so horrific that, I mean, you're not emotionally available. Your children get removed. You're going to every agency, anybody who will listen to you. It's the only conversation you have with anyone because you're trying to figure out how to get your kids back. So you're not emotionally available. Well, who's the benefactor of you not being available? The kids that are most vulnerable, that are still there, who still need to be loved, still need attention, still need their meals prepared. It's horrible. Horrible. So I would say that is one correlation that has been made for the rise in teen suicides.
Well said, Gwen. They destroy the family structure. There's so many ways they do it, but they basically destroy the family structure, and by doing that, they know the repercussions it's going to have. Even if kids are like, I don't need my parents. Yes, you do. We're tribal in nature. We need that, whether you realize it or not. Subconsciously, to a certain degree, we need that. We don't function well without it. So what they do, it's just like basic training. Anybody that's ever been through basic will tell you they strip you down to your basics, to everything, to your core, and then build you back up. And that's right. What they're doing. That's what they're doing with the children.
Well, and the similarities, even the language, the terminology that Hitler used in the best interest of the children, re-education. These are all this is all terminology that the Department of Social Services uses, and so the idea of the boarding school, which was a re-education program, is still alive and well. And believe me, they're just not re-educating Native children, because now the Natives are filing lawsuits and raising hell and exposing these criminal, unaccountable bastards for exactly what they are and what they do. So now they have to move along to someone else. So who are they moving along to now? They're moving along to homeschoolers. They're moving along to patriots. They're moving along to people who are educated and not wanting to vaccinate their children. So in any way that you want to take control of the well-being of your children, you're now the target. And I'm telling you, you do not have to be poor, you do not have to abuse, and you do not have to neglect your children. All that has to happen is some catty damn nosy neighbor has to call and anonymously report some infraction in your parenting, and you're going to have those bastards knocking on your door.
That happens all the time. I mean, people let their kids go out and play in the backyard now, and the cops are at their door. How dare you? We could arrest you. It's like, I want to say to the cops and the CPS employees that come to the house, like, if I wish I had like superpowers and I could like phase myself there at that moment, because I would be like, hold up, wait a minute, call me Captain Common Sense. That's going to be my superhero nickname. I'm going to come in and just stop you for a second, right, and make you think. Did you not go and play outside as a child, officer? How about you two boneheads from the CPS? Didn't you two geniuses run outside? I guess there's usually two of them. Didn't you guys run outside and play, when you were a kid? Didn't you pick up rocks and sticks, officer, and play cowboys and Indians? Because I bring that up as a facetious shot at history. Sorry, I have to slap the history books of this country in the face as much as I can for what they've done, especially because of tonight's agenda. But anyway, I want to look at the cop and say, like, what are you, dumb? Like, didn't you run around? Didn't you want to be a cop when you grew up? Didn't you run around with your toy gun and your toy badge, right? So did you run out in the backyard? Well, yeah, my mom would always make us play because she didn't want us in the house while she was cleaning.
Exactly.
Okay. So how is that against the law now? Like, how is it your mom was cool with putting you out in the backyard, but this woman who's in your age group, your peer, is now a terrorist because she's letting her children do something that you did? That doesn't make any sense. Like, people need to think. They need to sit and think for a moment before they act. But see, that's the problem. They got rid of people that think. They only want people that act. That's why they hire police officers that have an IQ of 100 or below.
Well, it's the same with the social workers. I went after a few of them, and I do count some of my wins as being. I did get the sitting secretary of the Department of Social Services, who sat in the state for 26 years doing this shit. I did get him invited to resign or be fired after I took documentation to the Appropriations Committee of the state. I took this battle. I wrote letters to the United Nations. I wrote letters to Oprah Winfrey. Anybody I thought would expose this in the media. Anybody that I thought had any power to fix it or influence the outcome. I mean, I was relentless. And so we finally, now this is how sick and twisted it is. I had criminal collusion associated with the Department of Social Services documented that went back 30 and in some cases 35 years. And I finally called the legislator in my district. I didn't know him at the time, but I just called him and told him I was making a courtesy call because my next call was going to be to my lawyer to file a class action lawsuit against the state of South Dakota. And he called me back and said, well, you should talk to Representative Cloud. He's the chairman of the Government Operations and Audit Committee of the state, and you need to get with him and blah, blah, blah. So that was my next call. And so then the guy goes, well, do you have everything I said to him? Can you prove that? Do you have that documented? Well, of course I could prove it, and I had it documented for 30 years back and then some in some cases. And he said, well, do you think you could bring that documentation and come to my office and have a meeting with me? And I said, well, I suppose I could rent a van and get it all in there. He goes, no, can you just kind of bring a cross section? So a couple of my advocates and we went up there to the Capitol, to meet with this asshat. So we finally are able to get legislative hearings. And so they let CPS, and this was after I got Secretary Ellenbecker invited to resign or be fired. And then so we finally get to have our hearings. Well, in the morning, of course, the Department of Social Services gets to give their story, but they're supposed to be giving us information about their policies and procedures. That's what this was about, was their policies and procedures and how they're being violated. and not being followed or whatever. So they got up, and we had a new secretary, and she stands up and she says, well, I'm always going to err on the side of the child because I don't ever want a child to die on my watch. 30 days later, to the day, a child died on her watch, roasted to death in a car where an infant in an infant seat got left in a car all day long and fried to death while the mother was at work and the dad was fishing. Do you want to know who that child was? Her grandchild. Her own grandchild. Now, did they come and remove the other child from the home according to their policies and procedures? Oh, hell no. Were there any neglect or any other criminal or administrative charges filed against either parent? Failure to protect or anything? Oh, hell no. Nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. Okay, so after the lunch break, I'm the first one to testify. And I was fashionably late coming in, you might say. I waited until everyone was in there. And I loaded 2 of the biggest tubs I had on a dolly, one stacked on top of another. And then my briefcase, which I couldn't even shut, on top of that. And I came walking into that room. They wanted documentation. Here you go. I come walking in, and I mean, you could just hear this collective gasp as I walked through the door with my documentation. They weren't interested in the documentation. To make this long story short, several months later, the very chairman of that GOAC committee was convicted of sexually abusing his own Native foster children and is now serving a 50-plus year prison sentence for sexually abusing Native foster children. And that's who we got to go tell our story to get something done about the abuses against Native children. Are you throwing up yet?
And just remember, ladies and gentlemen, what goes on the reservations, again, is a microcosm of what's going on throughout the rest of this country. Don't think that CPS would just harm Native children or black kids or Latino kids. They actually really like, one of their favorites is little blonde girls with blue eyes. Little white blonde girls with blue eyes.
Well, I want to tell you.
Disgusting.
Little blonde girls with blue eyes are a hell of a lot easier to adopt out, and they can move them through a lot faster than they can Native children, because there's less, the parents are going to fight to the very end with getting the tribe to release those kids or getting the Indian Child Welfare Act to go away so that they can adopt them out. They can move little blonde, blue-eyed kids through a hell of a lot faster. And the younger they are, the better they like it. And now every hospital, every paramedic, every school teacher, bus drivers, you name it, they've made everybody the CPS snitches. And if they see something, say something. And so, yeah. It's disgusting.
No, you're right. And now everybody's a little CPS deputized snitch, and they think, well, I have to do it for the kids because, it's the shocking truth is too much for them. They don't want to believe it, right? Those stories about what happens with CPS, that's all just crazy conspiracy theory talk. That's just craziness. That stuff doesn't really happen, but yet it does really happen. I mean, they've lost children down here. CPS down here in Florida has lost children.
Right.
And the people don't get fired. Gwen, that's what kills me. The people that are supposed to, like the state employees that are supposed to be looking after these kids, some of them had the children in their care. And in one case, I think the one woman finally got, this one woman, because she was involved with this little girl. Her name was Rhea Wilson. I remember this. This is from like 10 or 11 years ago. I think they finally figured out what happened to her. Somebody had killed her, obviously. But I don't know if she was kidnapped or I can't remember if they had kidnapped her and the CPS worker was involved or she had sold her or whatever. But like in this case, I think this woman, the only thing they were able to nail her with, because they couldn't connect her, I think they were only able to nail her with neglect or something like that. And they had to because it was such a public case. But most of the time, they've lost kids down here. They don't get in trouble. How do you lose a child?
Well, I'll tell you, this is why the Adoption and Safe Families Act got passed. And that was their premise, is that there are too many kids lingering in foster care in places like New York, Detroit, Miami, Chicago, LA. So their idea was, because these kids were literally getting lost in the system, because they didn't have well-trained social workers, they were underpaid, overworked, and they had a very high turnover. So before a social worker could get through their caseload, she'd quit, and then they get a new worker, and they'd start through, and pretty soon they don't even know where these kids are. So that's exactly.
But it just amazes me how they come up with the
state
excuse. We lost the kid. How do you lose a child? I mean, like, realistically, you didn't lose that kid. That kid got, quote unquote, lost on purpose. And a lot of times it goes that these kids get used in sacrifices, or they get sold into the white slave trade.
We know for a fact, and we know that there are judges and social workers in South Dakota moving children out of state that are Native children that have not been, they're not eligible for enrollment. And so then they avoid, the scrutiny of the ICWA worker on the reservation, and then they terminate the parental rights, and those children are moved. There was even a tribal judge, a guy that ran a newspaper on the reservation, called me, and he was posting articles. I was writing articles about what was going on, and he called me one day and he said, "You're not going to believe what I have. Someone sent him the copy of a canceled check from the state of Minnesota that was written to one of the tribal judges who was selling the kids to the state of Minnesota."
That's just disgusting. And when these judges get caught, these guys got caught. I think they only went. I don't know how long they went to jail for. I don't even know if they got jail time, to be honest with you. I don't remember because I'm a little exhausted today. But I can't remember off the top of my head. If I'd have to go look it up. But a couple of years ago here in Florida, these two judges got nailed because they were like $5,000 a pop. They would send these kids to these reform school places, like where they found these kids buried. I was talking about earlier.
Exactly.
And they would send these kids there, and the judges would make $5,000 a pop from the school, because the school gets money from the state to house these kids, and they get way more than that $5,000. So they can afford to take $5,000 out for each kid and give it to the judge, because as long as the judge is loading them up with children, everybody's going to be happy. And that's what they would do. I mean, there's kids, you listen to some of these stories. There's one of the girls that testified against these two judges, Gwen. She went, they were girls that were put through it, guys. One of the girls went up there. I think she threw a steak at her mother's boyfriend or something. I think that was or threw it at her mother. She picked up a steak and threw it. I remember that she had thrown a steak. That was like the weapon she had used. They charged her with throwing a missile, using a missile, because that's what they consider to be a missile, anything you throw in the air, right? The use of a missile as a weapon with the steak, and the judge threw her like 4 or 5 months into one of these schools. And it's the same thing with these young kids, too, the boys. They do the same thing. They put them into these schools, these boarding schools, these camps, whatever, and then they get raped, beaten. The girls get raped, beaten. If they open their mouths, they get strangled, shot, stabbed, and they find them buried, in a shallow grave out back. And then everybody's surprised that this goes on. But when you tell them 5 years before, nobody wants to hear the truth. No, it's too shocking.
They're tasing 8-year-old Native girls.
It's disgusting. I'm going to close this right there because the break is sneaking up. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. When we get back, we're going to pick it up there because Gwen just piqued my interest. Don't go anywhere. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. Final segment of tonight's live edition. Actually, final segment of any live edition for 2014. When I sign off tonight, I'll tell you all how I will see you all in 2015. I'll see you next year. That old gag. Anyway, make sure you do remember that we have changed up the schedule quite a bit here at Truth Frequency Radio. After I get off air tonight, make sure you stay tuned in my buddies from the Rundown Live. Mike Pachesney and Kriston Harris will be going live again on their second night here on TFR, so stay tuned for that. And then after that, we got Phoenix. We got a great new lineup. Remember, Kev starts an hour earlier now. So if you're on the East Coast, it's Kev starts at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard, and then depending on which day it is, it's either Joe or myself, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard. And then after that, from 9 to 10, you got the Rundown Live, Eastern Standard. And then from 10 to midnight, in my old slot, you have Phoenix. So we have this awesome, awesome nighttime lineup here at TFR. So just remember, I know things got a little crazy with the schedule the past week and a half, 2 weeks. Beginning of the new year, everything will be set in stone and moving forward smoothly. So thanks for hanging with us this whole year, and stay tuned for next year in 2015 because it's going to be jam-packed and awesome. So now that we got all that out of the way, Gwen, we got about 24 minutes left. First, I want to ask you, because there's three things we're going to get into. I know we're going to get into Wounded Knee a little bit. I know you want to talk about Medicine Horse Village. But before we talk about either of those two things, you said something going into break that just absolutely disgusted me, and I'm sure it probably disgusted everybody that heard it. You said an 8-year-old native girl was tased.
Yep, by police.
Now, was it tribal police, or was it...
No, it was stateside police in Pierre.
Why, may I ask? Was an 8-year-old tased?
Does it matter? I mean, I can't imagine, short of her having a loaded firearm, why grown men, police officers, could not stop the threat short of tasing an 8-year-old child.
Well, that's why I asked you, like, why? Because, like, I can't think of... Even if she had a loaded firearm, she's 8. She's 8. Unless the kid's a marksman, unless, like, she's one of these kids that you see that their parents take them to the range every day and train, then maybe you got to tase that kid, because that kid might actually nail you. But, like... really? How many of you were there? Did it really take you to... See, that's just that these tools make the...
Are our cops that big of pussies?
Yes.
And
yes.
So ill-trained that they cannot disarm or manage an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old. You know, you see all the time. And this is not Native kids, ladies and gentlemen. This is nice little white folk in mainstream America. Some kid acting up in the lunch line. Next thing you know, he's being handcuffed and hauled out of his school by the police. You know, when I went to school, you acted up in the lunch line. You got your hand slapped with the ruler and you got sent to the principal's office and your parents got called and then you got your ass beat when you got home.
Yeah, it's not like that anymore.
That's how that rolled out in my world.
It's different now. Well, you know, look... one of my friends who has a special needs child recently had that where she got to the school and her son was being restrained on the floor by a cop, and it was, why are you restraining him? You know that sometimes, with his condition, sometimes he has outbursts. Everybody at the school knows it. So it wasn't so much this, it wasn't that the school called the police. They have a resource officer now. So the resource officer just came in and he acted accordingly.
Resource officers, social workers, they're now employing the entire Nazi reservation structure in the school system. It's another system of programming. And this, the reservations were basically a test ground. And they've got it down, and now it's moving into mainstream America in every aspect. And, this idea, you natives need to sit down and shut up and just assimilate and, quit complaining about what happened in the 1800s, get a job, get a life. On Pine Ridge Reservation, there are 4,000 heads of households that do not have a home. There are 3-bedroom houses that 5 and 6 families, up to 30 people living in a 3-bedroom house because there isn't any housing on the reservation. You come stateside, you can get work. There is no shortage of work here, but you can work 2 jobs and you're still not going to make enough money to be able to afford housing stateside. There is no affordable housing. So you live where there's 4,000 heads of household with no homes, 85 to 92%, 95% unemployment rate. Really? Now, somebody tell me what the solution is. The Native Americans have the highest ethnicity of enlistment in the United States militaries. 40% of the homeless veterans in the city where I live are Native. In the homeless, just in general, the male homeless population, which in our community we have, our town is like 65,000 people, and there are 800 homeless people, and I would say more than 95% of those are Native. And if you go to the women's shelter, it's predominantly Native as well. I would say 90 to 95% of the people in the women's and children's homeless shelter are Native. And then last year, 590 women went through the domestic violence shelter, 80% of whom were Native.
That's just very sobering statistics. And it's very, wow. And again, this is from the destruction of the family. This is from what has been done. This is what's going to happen to society as a whole. And then when everything is in chaos, that's when they'll come up on their little high horse and they'll tell everybody that they have the order. And then, of course, the order is their little plan all along, their whole agenda. And by the way, when Gwen said that the genocide's been going on for hundreds of years, she's referring to that even before the settlers, or what we know as our founding settlers, came here to the United States. There's plenty of evidence, that there was that, like, when Christopher Columbus came here, they knew that this was here. It wasn't by accident. He was actually sent here on purpose. But going all the way back to at least the Queen of Spain, like Elizabeth, there was that far back. There was this, and the royal families thereof. There was this order, because all these royal families, the Spanish royal family, the German royal families, they're all that same royal bloodline. They're all related, all of them. Doesn't matter which country they're in, they're all related. Okay, and they over the years, it's always been passed down by whoever was running things at the time, whatever dictator was in charge of whoever had the empire at the time. And Michael Tessarion talks about this, that there was this order that was like, you just exterminate any Native people wherever you find them. And that's why there's so many Native cultures that have been wiped from this planet.
There's, I believe that our spirituality is, I think that is the biggest threat to them, because we cannot be controlled by their religious systems, and I believe that even like the ghost dancers, they forbid the ghost dance to go on, and even my grandpa, was fighting, and my son's grandpa, they were fighting to get the Indian Religious Act passed so that they could do their ceremonies and practice their religion, because they forbid it. And I think they forbid it because it was so powerful and they were so scared of it. And then they wouldn't be able to, if people were being traditional, then they couldn't brainwash them into being part of their religious programming. And so I think that the ghost dance, when Wavoka, started talking about the ghost dance and how the buffalo would come back and the white people would go away if you did the ghost dance and all of that. I mean, I think it really scared the powers that were at that time, namely the 7th Cavalry, and they wanted to put a stop to that. They did not want people coming together with that kind of intent or power to practice anything traditional, especially if it had spiritual connotations. Period. I mean, and then you went from, all that ghost dance stuff was happening, just prior to the massacre at Wounded Knee, and what's really disgusting is that the military personnel that massacred all those unarmed women, children, and elderly, they got medals of honor for that. And people are still trying to have those medals of honor revoked. There's no honor in slaughtering unarmed women, children, and elderly by any standard, except the Corporation of the United States. But that's how they roll. We're gonna honor the slaughter. They had nowhere to go. They were peaceful. They were unarmed. They were going for shelter and help. One day out from their destination, over 300 men and women and children slaughtered, and then buried in a mass grave.
And you were telling me, I remember one time we were talking about this, you would tell me that there were riders that rode so hard. Didn't they ride some of them right off the cliffs?
That was, yeah. Yeah, they, when we occupied the stronghold, there were people out doing perimeter security checks, and they found, the Badlands, they just dropped straight off, but there are shelves off of some of those places on the way down, and there were remains of horses and riders that had fallen and hit those shelves, and they died in the fall in the fall, and then they were just there on the shelves, their remains.
That had to be pretty powerful when you guys were there. And what she means is Gwen was actually on the ground there. You actually got a chance to feel the spiritual presence of what happened there, the energy that was released during that horrific event. You were telling me it was just a very surreal, powerful experience, you actually being there.
Yeah, that was that was quite an experience. I was the only woman that was camped there, and my son was the only child. There were others that would come and go, but on a day-to-day basis, I was the only woman there. And the first night I got there, I didn't have time to set up camp, and so I slept in my car. And that night, I woke up, and I don't even know what woke me up, but I had my car seat laid back, and my head was just where my eyes are just right above the window. I mean, the window, the door, and I look out, and I just see this white, shimmering figure looking into a van where two other people that were there at the stronghold were sleeping inside the van, and in the spirit, she's just there. She was just like looking in on them, and I went, "Whoa!" All right. Yeah, there were a lot of things that happened. The one day that I was pretty much out there, but I don't think there was anyone else out there that day. The guys had all gone in to do a radio show on the reservation radio station, and so I was doing perimeter checks, and I was almost back to the camp, and I was gathering rocks as I saw rocks because I wanted to build a solar shower house, and I needed rocks to put on the floor. And so as I saw rocks, I was picking them up, and I had stopped the car to get out and pick up a rock I saw, and I didn't even hear it. You couldn't even hear it, but then just this helicopter just popped up eye level above the Badlands. And I mean, we're just eye level to eye level. And I mean, I could have thrown a stone and hit that helicopter. And, at that point, you figure you're taking your last breaths, and I just raised my fist in the air, and I just yelled out something in Lakota, Tankashila, help me, but I was standing my ground, and if I was going to go, I was going to go on my feet. I wasn't going on my knees. And so yeah, there were some interesting things that happened during that occupation out there. We had, of course, the Park Service and the FBI flying over constantly, and their planes real low, and filming us and trying to intimidate us to leave the land. We were there because they were taking fossils out of the South Unit of the Badlands without tribal permission, number one, and they were destroying teepee rings and sacred sites in the process of it. So that's why we were there, was to stop that,
Yeah, they have this thing, like modern corporations have this thing where they just don't care about like sacred lands. They don't care about burial mounds. We'll just bulldoze over them. Let me just give you guys.
It's all about the money.
Let me just give everybody a piece of advice. Do not buy any land where there's an Indian burial mound and run a bulldozer through it. I don't care what you build on the property, you will always have problems because you disrespected a very sacred place. And whether you believe in it or not, there is energy there. Okay? Just I've literally been at Indian burial mounds. A place my wife and I used to, because remember, Gwen, that Marcy and I used to go ghost hunting and stuff. We love all the paranormal stuff, and we've been to places. We've been to this one place down in South Miami where there's Indian burial mounds that date back 10,000 years. And we were standing out in the swamp where these mounds are because we had permission to go out and kind of check it out. And we were out there at like 3 o'clock in the morning. We didn't stand on the mounds. We were just in the area where the mounds were because we didn't want to disrespect anything. And there was a lot of stuff going on in that swamp. Okay? Yep. There was a lot of spirits. There was a lot of stuff out there. So, like, people just should be very respectful. I've always, maybe it's because I have Native American blood in me, but I've always, since I was as far back as I can remember, I've always revered the natives. And I've always had a special reverence for a lot of their sacred and holy, I don't want to say holy, but sacred sites or things that they considered sacred or their beliefs. And I seen it with my own two eyes. I felt the power of those places. So you just should not, just as a warning to anybody, because for some reason corporations seem to be buying a lot of land that has, or trying to get land from natives, and or that might have an old burial mound on it or something. And when they do, they build like a mall or something on it, or a housing project.
Well, they did the same thing. They did the same thing to the Druids, but the churches, their ceremonies. The Druids had very similar ceremonies in some ways to the natives on this continent, and the trees were sacred to them, and they would have different ceremonies that surrounded these trees. Well, what the churches did is they came in and they cut down those sacred trees, and they would build the churches on top of them. And, and then they would burn the women, saying they were witches. And, the fear, and I think more than a fear of the spirituality, it's the fear of the power of women in that culture. And I also, because all of those cultures were very matriarchal, and the church historically has been very patriarchal. And so it's about that. And it's also about not being able to control people that don't believe what you believe. You have to believe in their story, the hell story, Uncle Leonard Crow Dog, it was so funny. He said one time, he goes, yeah, I used to be a Catholic. He said, I went to that Catholic school and all I heard about was how I was going to go to hell. And he said, I was really glad I was an Indian because he said, I decided I was just going to go back and be an Indian because if I was an Indian, we didn't have a hell. So I figured if I was an Indian, I wasn't going to hell. And, everybody kind of laughed about it at the time, but, that's really true. If you don't believe their storyline, then they can't control you with it. And that was really, that's what they do. They intimidate you and control you and make you fear them. And they want you broken. And they've been very successful at that in a lot of ways. We just have a few minutes, so I want to talk real quickly about Medicine Horse Village. It's a project that I founded, and what we are doing is we are, because there are so many homeless and people that are in some form of transitional housing or have no housing of their own, we are working on a project to provide affordable housing. Jobs really isn't an issue. There are jobs, but affordable housing is the issue. But we're going to be offering affordable housing and providing support services, things like yoga, massage, tapping, and other healing modalities for the veterans. We'll have nurses on staff to check in on the veterans who are medication dependent for medical needs so that they can have independent housing. And in as much as we can, as we create employment, we hope to fill those positions and train the natives in our community to take those job positions. And it will be a fully supported and we're working with the director of the homeless veterans and the directors of both the women and children's and the men's homeless shelter, and also with the director at the domestic violence shelter. And we're now writing a project plan to get funding for this project. And what we want to do is give the training and the tools for food independence, because good, healthy, organic food certainly cuts down on your risk of disease. And I think that the less disease that you have, the less that you need alcohol, drugs, suicide. I don't think it solves all the problems, but it's a start. It starts healing your body from the inside out. And so we're doing some really exciting things right now, and we feel we've had a great response from the collaboration with in the community, and so we feel really positive about the direction that the project is moving in. One of the things that we're going to that's going to be a huge part of this project is we want to get the film, we want to get the kids, the teenagers that are at risk for suicide into a film class and give them the tools that they need, the editing equipment, the cameras, the teachers, so that they can start telling their oral history, so that they can start talking about their life past and what they see in the future, what they would like to create, and start moving them into something that gives them a way of self-expression for healing, so that they're in a drug and alcohol-free environment with support, with tools to do something positive and hopefully deter them from, viewing suicide as, their alternative. Because in my view, suicide is always a long-term solution to a short-term problem. So anyway, so that's what we're doing at Medicine Horse Village. You can go to our website, medicinehorsevillage.com, and keep up with us, see what we're doing.
Gwen, I got to cut you off because the end of the show is literally sneaking up, but I wanted to give you as much time as I could to get that out. Now, you fit that in perfectly. Thank you so much for coming on again tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you do your education, research. As I always tell you, they're not going to tell you the truth. You got to find it on your own. And remember, the solutions to our problems are an inside job. They're inside each of us and each of you. I love you all. I'll see you all again Thursday. I'm out of here.